My name is Joe Gork, and I'm an alcoholic. And my sobriety date is June 28th, 1986. My home group is the Turning Point group. So, you got it. Anyway, I had not spoke before a crowd this big in a long time, since before COVID. So, but as I said, I'm not used to talking into a mic, but I'll do my best. Let me share one thing. This is a Friday night. It was a Friday night, June 28th, 1986. I was in a bar, and I had been drinking all day, from about 7 o'clock in the morning till 7:40 that Friday night. About that time, the bartender who had served me that morning at 7 o'clock happened to come in that bar. He happened to be down in Renton, Washington at the dog races. He came in for a nightcap. And so he saw me, and he came up to me. And he said, "Joe, don't you think you've had enough?" That was the first spiritual experience in my journey towards emotional sobriety. And so how did I get there? Well, let me go back to what it was like. I was born a preemie and spent 6 weeks in an incubator. When they told me I was in an incubator, I thought they were talking about one of these things you put chickens in. Found out there wasn't pigs. But anyway, I was born into a Catholic family. My father was a top executive for a manufacturing firm. And anyway, I was born into that family. When I was 5 years old, my father abandoned my mother and myself because he was an alcoholic. Not only was he an alcoholic, but everybody on his side of the family was an alcoholic. So I kind of birthed myself into it. But anyway, so he abandoned us when I was about 5 years old, wound up on Skid Row. And so it was just my mother and I. My mother passed away when I was 10 years old, and I was placed in an orphanage for 6 years. And I got to admit, that orphanage, I got a great education, not only in elementary school, but also in high school. However, I was molested in that orphanage. Don't think that had anything to do with my drinking. I was 11 years old when I had my first drink. And so, when I in that orphanage, I remember I left there when I was in the senior high. Now, all I had family left was 2 aunts. One of them was 70 years old, and a half-brother. My half-brother was a mean, nasty drunk. He almost killed me with a chair one day. But anyway, so I went and stayed with this family. I left the orphanage as a senior. I went and stayed with this family, distant relative, for about my senior year in high school. I could not wait to get the hell out of that town, upstate New York, Troy, New York. So as soon as I graduated, I joined the Navy. That was my choice. My 70-year-old aunt had come down and signed for me because I was still underage. So I joined the Navy. And so I went through boot camp and hospital corps school at Bainbridge. Left there and went to Corpus Christi, Texas, and then I went to Boston, Massachusetts, the Naval Hospital there as going to school. Now, my drinking started picking up when I was a senior in high school. Now, I wasn't really getting drunk, but I was kind of drinking on a regular basis as a senior in high school. Anyway, got to school up there in the Naval Hospital, Chelsea, Massachusetts. And just a little side story. They had a club on the hospital compound. Well, I found out where the club was. And I spent a lot of time at that club. You know, as much time as I did learning how to be a lab technician. Anyway, I went out really got hammered one night. And I came back to my room, and I was sick to my stomach, and I bent over hugged the commode, started vomiting. And didn't my roommate come home? He was drunk, and he just barked right over me. That's what you call, Talk about drunken sailors. I used to take offense to that, but not anymore. But anyway, so I made my way as I left Bainbridge, Maryland. Just one other side story. I was at a bar in Washington, D.C. Some people have heard me share this. And in this bar, there was a saying on the wall. And the saying was, everything in life is either illegal, immoral, or fattening. And I said, aha, that's the mantra I'm going to live by the rest of my life. Because when I was a senior in high school and getting ready to leave, I wanted to have a family because I didn't have a family growing up. So I was going to have a wife, 2.5 children, and a white picket fence. Now, why 2.5 children? Well, you know how that is. As it wound up, I had 5 children. Okay? So anyway, my drinking was probably on the weekends, and I was kind of, got a little hammered or whatever. But then I I started drinking a little bit heavier. And in July, I was assigned to a ship in Norfolk, Virginia. And I met my wife on a blind date. So that was in 1957. We got married February 15th, 1958. Now, remember I said 2.5 children? We wound up with 5. And so, and I did wind up eventually with a house and a white picket fence. Okay? But my drinking started escalating and picking up more so than the Navy was in the Navy. Now, I'm not going to go into any drunk logs, but hey, you can imagine, I spent most of my time away from the house. I wasn't one of those people that drank in the house. And my life got pretty bizarre when I was in the Navy, I'll tell you that. And it was, a lot of it was illegal, a lot of it was immoral. I remember coming home from one Saturday night, being out drinking maybe about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And you want to know, I got home, went to bed, got up bright and chipper, got dressed, and went to church. And this is after I'd been what? Out there carousing around the neighborhood, getting drunk, and you know what. So that was where the hypocrisy stepped in. And so as my career went, I started drinking pretty heavy. And how I got through the Navy, I'll never know. But I got through. I did my job, and I got promoted. And so, I'm not going to go into, as I said, too many drunk logs. Nevertheless, I got some real problems when I was in the Navy, and almost got thrown in the brig. So, anyway, a good friend of mine was a doctor, and when I was in submarines, served with him for a little while. And he became the medical director for Boeing Airplane Company. And so my last tour of duty in the Navy was at Navy Safety Center. And so I got to go out to Seattle, Washington on a safety trip. And I realized he was working for Boeing. Well, he not only was working for Boeing, he was a medical director for Boeing. So I got up with him, of course, went over to his house and had 100 drinks. And he offered me a job. So I got this job, and because he knew my background. So I went home back here back to Virginia Beach. And I said to my wife, how would you like to live in Seattle? And she said, where in the hell is Seattle? So anyway, we wound up and with 5 children. I had a dachshund pup that gave birth to 7 puppies. And so we had the 7 puppies, the dachshund, and 4 children. My youngest son decided to get in a fight just before we left, so they had to hospitalize him, so he had to stay behind. So we took this road trip all the way to Seattle, Washington. I was thinking, hey, Now I have an opportunity to maybe fix my drinking, you know, got another chance. Well, got to Seattle and started working, so on and so forth. But my drinking got worse. And I kept going out, and I kept doing drunk. And I kept coming in the house at all hours in the morning. What I used to do is I'd go to work, and then leave work maybe about 10:30. Tell somebody I was going to go check on a ship or something, and I'd go drink until about midnight. And then I'd go home. Now this is a pattern I maintained for almost, no, 18 years, no, go back. For at least 7 years. We were there in Seattle. Finally, my boss and my wife decided I had enough. So they intervened, did an intervention on me in 1984. And so I agreed to go to outpatient therapy. And so I went to this outpatient therapist. Ho, that was fun. All we talked about, and I guess they came to the conclusion that we had a communications problem at home. Well, hell yes. If I wasn't home, to communicate with my wife, you know, duh. So anyway, so I agreed to go to treatment. So I went to 8 weeks outpatient treatment. And when we got finished, he said, now, Joe, you got to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, you got to be kidding me, to myself. So I got my wife. She was at that last session. We went over to a local diner and had dinner. Going to celebrate, right? What did Joe have? Yeah, you're right. A couple cocktails. And so we were off and running again. So, that was in 1984. They did that intervention on me. So I told you, I used to leave work, or I'd call work and say, hey, I couldn't come in today because I'm sick. I have tsetse fly disease. Well, hell, we all know that tsetse flies are not endemic to the United States. So nevertheless, that was my pattern. So I remember my drinking really got bad in the last 2 years of my employment with the Boeing Airplane Company. That was 1984, I had that intervention. Well, finally, the miracle. When I remember just one Friday, as I said, I was out drinking, getting hammered, and I get this first spiritual experience. Joe, don't you think you've had enough? I have not had a drink since that night, June 28th, 7:40 in the evening. I've had a drink in 36 years. Now, so my boss confronted me the following Monday. He said, Joe, what the hell's going on? I said, what do you mean? He said, do you know you haven't worked a full week in years? Oops. Did I know that? Yeah, but I'm going to tell him. Anyway, he said, Joe, what's the problem? I said to him, I think I have a drinking problem. I mean, I was a snot-flying drunk, never mind, I think I had a drinking problem. So I remember they did do an assessment on me when I was in that outpatient treatment. And the finding was that I was a mid-stage, late-stage alcoholic. Oh boy, I was almost way up there to the top. Anyway, I got that night. And so that morning, he said, what the hell's going on? He said, you either get help or get out. He said, do you know you haven't worked a full week in years? I didn't know that. So that was my pattern. I'd get up and leave work, or I'd get up and call in and make an excuse. Go out and get drunk, maybe only 2 or 3 days a week. Anyway, so I asked about, where the treatment centers were. And they told me about, there was 2 of them. One was in Seattle proper, and that was Mother Cabrini. And there was one out in the boondocks in Washington State. So I said, what's the difference between the 2 centers? And the PAP said, well, the one in Seattle was kind of packed on your back type of treatment. The one out in the boondocks was writing your face AA. So you know what I chose, right? Yeah, I did go to the one out in the boondocks, and I was writing my face AA. But that night, when I had that first spiritual experience, I had my second spiritual experience in that treatment center. Because my wife would not come up and participate in the family treatment program. So I said, I'm gonna leave. My car was out in the parking lot. So I went up to the desk, was gonna get my keys. They said, you can't have the keys. Well, why not? Well, anyway. So the director, the clinical director of that treatment center came up to me. This was spiritual experience number 2. He came up and said, Joe, we just heard about your family not wanting to participate in treatment, that we don't need them, but we do need you. He said, don't ever let anyone sabotage your sobriety. Don't ever. Because it has to go above job, family, and friends. And some people don't want to hear that. That our sobriety has to go above job, family, and friends. But it certainly is. That was my second spiritual awakening. So I decided to stay. So they handed me a step 1. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with step 1. If they were polished over alcohol, I would become a manager. So they handed me this step 1, and I started reading it. Then they handed me a copy of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Then they handed me a copy of the 12 and 12. Then Living Sober. Well, I opened that big book, and I started reading. And so I started reading, and I said, all of a sudden it dawned on me. There was my story right in print. It was explaining me, it was describing me, but more importantly, it was describing a brand new way of living sober. And that's what that book got me started, and I couldn't put it down. Did a step 1, 18 pages. For step 1. So you know that's step 1. We'll think about step 4. Step 1 for me was a step 4 all wrapped up in one. We had to give our step 1 to a group. We had small groups. We had to sit there and give that step 1. Took 2 hours for me to explain that step 1. And then I went to my room, lay down and cried. Then one of the staff came in and said, Joe, they want to see you out in the front desk. So I went up there and they said, we understand you asked for 2 aspirin. Yeah. What do you want them for? I said, I had a headache, just answered. There was 18 pages of step 1. So anyway, I managed to get through that treatment program. Interestingly enough, the therapist I had came up to me when I was getting ready to leave. She said, Joe, if I had known you were a military drunk, I would have written you off. And I said, well, hey, I've been wanting to show that therapist, where I am today. However, she's passed away. I can't do that. But nevertheless, so I left treatment. They said, now, they introduced me to AA. We had AA coming into the treatment center. And I remember, enjoying their talks and all that. Now, so they said, Joe, you're going to have to go to AA. And I said, I don't think I want to go to AA. My vision of AA at the time, remember, my father hit Skid Row. However, I happened to see him one day. I was at a child daycare center. And I happened to be, and we're on upstate New York where I was, this street that bordered this daycare center. I saw this bummy looking fellow walking by. You know who it was? My father. And I did not call him or anything like that. But where I'm going with this is that I never saw him again until 1971, when he was in the hospital dying of cancer and all that. So anyway, I remember my vision of AA was little dirty looking guys in trench coats. Okay, because my dad was wearing a trench coat that day walking by. And I'm thinking, hey, I'm at home AA, all those drunken bones in there. But anyway, they did give me an address. So I went to this Alano Club, AA clubhouse. Guess what? Yeah, there was about 2 guys sitting in there with a dirty old coat. Oh, crap. Anyway, I got a list of AA meetings. And so I started looking around. I went to one meeting, it was 200 people at this AA meeting. Wow. That's too many for me. If you're in a submarine, you got to understand, that's just a little bunch of us, about 100 and some. But this was 208 people at an AA meeting. And so I decided I needed to find something else. So using this profound logic, I took a calendar, took a dart, threw the dart at the calendar, and lo and behold, it landed on a Wednesday night. I found out that there were 3 AA meetings in the town I lived in up there in Seattle. It was called the Bothell Wednesday Night AA Group. And so I decided, well, I'm going to try that out. That's where the dart landed. So I went to that meeting. Walked up to the door, and there's a guy outside the door, and he was saying, "Hey, welcome, how you doing?" "Fine." You know what he said? You know what fine means? Yeah, if you all know what fine means, I'm not going to repeat it. So I went in, walked in that meeting, and I'm looking around, and after I'd been there 10 minutes, I said to myself, you have found where you're supposed to be. That began the journey. That began the journey of recovery, emotional recovery. We met on Wednesday nights, and so I got a sponsor. Let me back up a little bit. Let me tell you what I learned from when I first went to that meeting. They told me that you had to do 5 things. One was, don't drink today. These are all really profound. Don't drink today. Go to your meetings. Get a sponsor. Avoid to speak with people, places, and situations. And study the literature. Apply the literature to your life. Well, having already started the big book and started, 12 and 12, started Living Sober. They gave them to me when I was in treatment. And I was just so excited about this new way of living I was seeing in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I got a sponsor. This gentleman had 6 years sober, had been in the Navy, so we had a connection there. His sponsor had 45 years, and he was an old Irishman. Right? So I was blessed. That was where the blessing started, folks, for me, was when I walked into that meeting. The blessing started. Because since then, the blessings of my life are too numerous to enumerate, believe it or not. Some of you know some of my medical history and all that. Standing up here. Nevertheless, I started attending that meeting, and they had a different way of doing a meeting there. There were 1.5 hour long meetings, and you had a chairperson, and we had 4 separate meetings. We had a first step 1 meeting, another step meeting, a big book discussion, and I forget what the other one was. There was 4 of them. And so you would serve for 6 months as a chairperson. So I would sit, get together, get the people together, assign the chairpersons for the other meetings, and so on. Remember, these were 1.5 hour meetings. And so I remember this. I remember mumbling to somebody. You know how when we're early in sobriety, how we like to whine and snivel a lot. Anyway, I whined and snivelled a lot. Anyway, I said to one of the guys, hey, I need some help. I got to set the chairs up for the meeting. I got to make the coffee. I got to do this. I got to do that. And he said, Joe, why don't you just ask somebody for some help? Oh, what a beautiful idea. So I did. So that turned out well. I served my 6 months and so on. Well, then, they got me in the service. They made me, let's see, 6 months, yeah. They elected me as a GSR. And you all know what a GSR is, right? Okay? I was promoted as a GSR. So, well, I was, oh boy, I'm a GSR. Yeah, I mean, I felt really good. And so, now, in the meantime, getting back to my wife, by the way, we just celebrated 65 years. And so, hey, did something right. Did something right. Remember I said about the blessings and the spiritual experiences? Well, too numerous to numerous. Anyway, so got to be a GSR. I remember one meeting. And our meetings were eating meetings too. And so we were taking the agenda. One of the agenda items was allotting $25 for the area archives. And so I thought, as a GSR, we didn't really need to discuss that. So I just blew right by it in the meeting. Till somebody said, hold on, Joe, come back to that other one, the $25. Do you know they made a big deal out of that $25? They argued for an hour on that. But I learned an important lesson. And so, the next heartbreak I had the GSR. The GSRs in this district were asked to do a 2-minute dissertation on tradition number 2. So I said, oh boy. And I did it. I made up a 2-minute dissertation on the second tradition. And there was a big AA meeting, big function, assembly. And so they were going to call, all the GSRs were going to get up and do this 2-minute talk, right? So I'm sitting there listening to the GSRs giving their talk, and I'm sitting there. Finally, the moderator says, well, I'd like to thank everybody. Hey, wait a minute! You didn't call me. We were on. And so I went up to him and he said, your name's not on the list, Joe. So, I hot-footed it right to my DCM. And I wanted to know, hey, so-and-so, how come? You know what she said? I forgot to put your name in. Now but I learned some important lessons that day, that assembly. Humility. There's four spiritual principles near and dear to me. One is acceptance. The other one is gratitude. The other one is humility. And the last one is responsibility. Now there's other ones, but those are the 4 basics for me. And so I matriculated through that AA group. And I remember I decided I wanted to do something more. So I went down to they told me I need to go to Seattle University and see about becoming a counselor. My A group was encouraging me to go and do that. So I went down to Seattle University. Now I had 2 years sobriety at that time. And I went and saw them and I asked them, and they said, well, I thought all you had to have 2 years. They said, no, 5 years. I said, oops, okay. I took that time to go to school. But before I even got to in the treatment, I need to tell you about my children. And this is one of the things that really got me. My children were running away from the house, and going down the street to live with a neighbor because their dad was a drunk. I don't know how and why my wife stood by me as long as she did, and how she's done it. But I know why. Faith, her faith. She has an unshakable faith in Jesus Christ. Anyway, so when I got down there and I said, well, so I enrolled in school to be a substitute youth counselor. And that was my goal, was to be a substitute youth counselor. But then we decided to move back here to North Carolina. And that was in 1992. Now, remember, I did get that house. And I did get that white picket fence. And I did have 2.5 children, well, actually 5. Right? So anyway, the children, we left all the children and grandchildren back in Washington State. And we come back here to North Carolina. We got back here, and a friend of mine who had served in submarines with me, served down at Tecumseh with me, was living up in Hickory. And we didn't know that my wife and I were back in town. And I remember him telling me, when we got together, he said, boy, when I heard that, he ran into his wife saying, Sandy, guess what? Joe and Gene are here, and they left all their kids out in Seattle. Yeah, why not? So anyway, we got back here, and I remember when I finally was bouncing around back here, bouncing around, and somebody come up to me. I think it was one of my neighbors, it was a school counselor. And she said, Joe, why don't you go on over to Coastal Plain Hospital and see if they had an opening? Because I was not a certified counselor, but I was going to school, or had been to school. So I went over to Coastal Plain Hospital and went in the lobby. And this lovely little white-haired lady was the receptionist. And I said, I'd like to see the guy in charge of the Alcohol and Drug Treatment Center. And she looked at me and she said, do you have an appointment? And I said, no. She looked at me again and probably saw that I was handsome, good looking, and smart. and so she said, wait a minute, let me see if he's available. He was available, and I had a job 15 minutes later. Wow. 18 years, Coastal Plain Hospital, substance use counselor. Now I share that with you because that was a highlight of my life. Some of the time I spent in that treatment center as a counselor. I had the opportunity not only to help these people through their alcohol, their addiction, and the groups I did. And why am I sharing this? Because I think it's important. I was working 3 days a week. We had an outpatient program, but we had to shut it down because the insurance went crazy on us. And so they asked me to come back to the inpatient unit, and because I was the only substance abuse counselor available, and state law required to have a substance abuse counselor in the unit. So that was me. And so I started working part-time, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And I got to call my salary. And I got to tell him what hours I would work. Yeah, God was up there, he was just driving me all over the place. And so I started working and doing inpatient groups, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But I had an opportunity that came up. The doctor that was assigned to the Coastal Plain Hospital was getting ready to leave. And some of you might know him, he was Scott Cunningham. He's getting ready to leave, and he moved. He came up and he said, Joe, you have a great opportunity. A great opportunity to share the gospel with your patients. And some of you might take offense to this, but I got to share that because that's an important part of my journey to recovery. And so I kind of slept on that and saying, how am I going to do that? I only got 3 days. So, sleeping one night, I just said, Lord, help me. Got up that morning and wow, it came to me. So, Tuesday morning, or Tuesday, I tilled the soil. Wednesday, I sowed the seed. Thursday, I reaped the harvest. People who brought Jesus Christ into their life as their Savior. That was a highlight of my life and my career as a recovered alcoholic. If someone here been through the IOP, I know that. And so, from my perspective, that was a turning point. My life was there. I never really, after that night, that Friday night, 7:40, that Friday night, never had a drink since then, never wanted a drink, believe it or not. Did I ever thought about it? Oh yeah, I did. In fact, it almost came close one time. I got into a situation I should never have gotten into at work. Be careful of relationships. So I got a comment. Careful of relationships. And I got near one I shouldn't have been. And so this relationship had a big problem with it. So I got angry, upset, and I was going to go get a drink. But I remember what they told me in AA, which you all heard. If you're tempted to go and have a drink, get on the phone or go see another alcoholic. I walked out of my office at 2:30 that afternoon and went to an Alamo club, which is about 20 minutes from where I worked. Walked in there and found another alcoholic and started talking to them for about 3 hours. Now, there are no coincidences in this program. They're all what? Spiritual experiences. And I remember that night was a Wednesday. Guess what? My AA group met that night.
Nice.
And so what? I had occasion, I talked to this one fellow in the Alamo Club until went home and went to the meeting that night. And I went up to my sponsors. Oh, those of you that had sponsors, they can be really, never mind. Anyway, I went up to my sponsor and told him what the problem was. And he said, Joe, did you drink? I said, no. He said, well, you know what you have to do? He just laughed and said, yeah, we've all had the same problem. But you know what you need to do? Go over in that corner, kneel down and say a prayer. And I did. And so today, these days, in 2010, I finally God thought I had enough. And so did this paranoid schizophrenic patient think I had enough. Because they attacked me. And he started beating on me. And so it turned out well. I had a few scratches on my head. Anyway, I said, Joe, I think you need to find another line of work. So I decided to retire. It was in 2010. However, I didn't give up my career. I went to work in a DWI program for 4 years. Well, along the way, there's been a number of spiritual experiences. When I we talk about spiritual experience and spiritual awakening, I looked at a spiritual awakening as a spiritual experience which occurs over time. Whereas a spiritual experience is something that occurs right then and now. And so, of course, I went through and experienced a spiritual awakening, which in turn led to a profound psychic change, sufficient to recover from alcoholism. Nevertheless, I remember when I was looking at doing this work in this DWI program, which I started there because it's a lot safer and all that. But then I started having some medical problems. March 16th was a Sunday. I'd been to church. I had a bad cold. I went to church, and I even taught Sunday school that morning. This was Sunday, 16th of March. Went home. My wife was cooking corned beef dinner. I am mostly Irish, believe it or not. Yeah. I didn't know that. They did a survey. Some cousins did a background check in my father's side of the family, and predominantly Irish. Well, I think that accounts for the drunks in the family, right? They loved it. The whole family on my father's side. I had a half brother who died about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. He was one mean SOB. In fact, his wife sent me after him when I was still living in New York. So I went and found him in this bar. And he said, "Get out of here, you little SOB." And he picked up a chair about ready to zoom me in. So I made a decision then. I'm not going after anybody in a bar and getting around behind them. That was a long time ago. But there was no love lost between my brother and my family and those people because, hey, he was a mean drunk. So anyway, that Sunday, about head to dinner, Carmi, of course. Then about 6:30, I started feeling having trouble breathing. So my wife said, "Do I want to call the rescue squad?" I said, "No, I'll go over to the emergency room. This is the old emergency room." So I go out, get in my truck. Here I'm having trouble breathing, right? Go in the door, get in my truck. Drive over to the hospital. We're only about 5 minutes from there. I go over to the hospital, get out of my truck, right? Walk into the emergency room, and I just collapsed. Now, there are no coincidences in this program. I collapsed right in front of an attendant with a wheelchair. And so they threw me in there and wheeled me in. Come to find out, I had 100% blockage in the right coronary artery, 80 in another, 60 in another. So he said, the doctor said, "Where do you want to go, Raleigh or Greenville?" I said, "Raleigh." So I went to Wake Med. I spent 35 days at Wake Med, all right? And on top of that, they did the dye test, that went fine. 4 days later, my aorta dissected. So I spent 35 days there. Fortunately, I was in the best place I could be. And had the chief of vascular surgery did the aorta repair. And so far, it's been a success. I'm so standing here. But I remember what they told me. "Joe, if you pick up a drink or pick up a cigarette, you're a dead man. You're a dead man." Anyway, while I was in Wake Med, and I'll end with this. While I was in Wake Med, I got real depressed. I remember reading somewhere and talking to somebody about, "Hey, why don't you kind of sing praises to God?" And because they said sometimes that works. So that night I did say a few prayers of praise to God. And the next morning that depression was gone. And I just couldn't get out of it. I wouldn't get out of there. My health's on the ground. So I believe this. AA is probably, from my perspective, not only as a person, but as a professional, probably the greatest discovery since the 20th century. Is that voice in my eyes, believe it or not. A lot of people, would disagree with that. But where can you go for $1 and get therapy for an hour? Is an AA meeting, if you think about it. And so these 12 steps, are still an important part of my life. I pray every day, and I practice the steps every day. One of the things I found out, a lot of people have relapsed. I asked them, "Did you pray today?" Guess what? Majority say no, they didn't. So this is an awesome program, and I've been so blessed. Not only in my health-wise, otherwise, in my church I go to, my medical staff over there And some of you I've known for a long time, one friends and I turned 86 last January, and so I know God has been keeping me around for something. And I'm just had, if I could sum it all up, happy, joyous, and free. I am happy, joyous, and free. Thank you.